Well, welcome everyone. I see we're at the top of the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to say hello and thank everyone for joining us to today's session of the AIEI webinar series on balanced mix design, Insights for Success. This is session one of three in our webinar series, focusing on practical insights from AIEI's recent peer-to-peer exchanges on balanced mix design. The session distills what's working, what isn't, and where agencies should focus next. The webinar will frame the why BMD case, highlighting the most common management and technical hurdles, and share some proven strategies agencies are using to successfully advance BMD implementation. First, I have a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. On the next slide. And we ask that everyone please keep your microphone muted during the webinar. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat box, which you can access by clicking chat in the meeting controls at the bottom of the screen. I'll compile questions during Derek's presentation, and Derek will address them at the end of the webinar as time allows. Any unanswered questions due to time constraints will try to respond separately in an email. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be provided later. And just as a reminder, all webinars that we have are posted on our AIEI website and the AIEI YouTube channel. And I think I just put a link for the AIEI YouTube channel into the chat box as well. So the next slide, we have a series overview. This is the first in a three-part series. The second part is going to be March 5th, and we'll talk about balanced mix design progress report. And that'll be a rapid look at how 6 states have advanced BMD since 2020. You'll highlight their key progress, challenges they've had to deal with, practical lessons in validation, acceptance, how to deal with volumetric properties, aging, and production. And that should be some good insights from some states that are more mature with their implementation. And then on April 9th, we'll have part 3. And part 3 is proving the payoff. And that's measured benefits of BMD. So this is some real world evidence from 4 states that show how BMD improved cracking and rutting performance, extended pavement life, reduced life cycle costs, and how agencies can quantify and communicate those benefits in terms of dollars and pavement performance. So we're really happy with this 3-part webinar series, and you can find links on the slide to register for these upcoming webinars, and also a flyer with the link will be shared in the chat box in just a little bit. For disclaimers, before we proceed, I'd like to share the following disclaimers. This is part of FHWA's information exchange under a cooperative agreement number that's listed there, and the U.S. government assumes no liability for use of the information presented. Except for statutes or regulations cited, the contents do not have the force of law or meant to bind you. It's really for informational purposes. And the U.S. government does not endorse any products or manufacturers. Any trademarks or manufacturers you see are just for informational purposes. And references to AASHTO and ASTM standards refers to those with a private entity and are voluntary and are not required to be in compliance with federal law. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to turn it over to Derek to kick off the presentation of this webinar. So Derek, it's turning over to you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone for joining us for the first in another series of AIEI webinars, where we're going to have, as Tim talked about, a series of webinars over the next couple months. I'm currently showing the acronym slide, again, abbreviations that you're going to see throughout this presentation. I'm going to pause here for a second while I push a couple polls to you through Zoom. We have 2 polls for you that we'd like you to answer before we go ahead and get started. So the first I'm going to launch is how many people are attending the webinar at the location you're at. So this is for catching people that may be watching it with others. Always a wonderful way to spend part of your day is watching a webinar about asphalt technology with some of your work friends. So if I'll leave that for just a moment here and ask you all to respond to that. See how participation is going up there. Right. I'm gonna end that one. And the second one I'm going to push here is asking you to let us know what's your affiliation type of organization that you represent. So again, appreciate you doing that. It helps us to know who's listening to these webinars, as the entire point of the AIEI program is to help us get better asphalt pavements across the country, and aiding agencies, industry, academia, etc., to help do that. So, as you're answering that again, appreciate you coming to the webinar today. For those of you that may not know, my name is Derek Niederplan. I am the principal at D&P Infrastructure, just my own consultancy, and I am lucky to be part of the AIEI team to help develop tools, information to help the asphalt industry around the country. So, for those of you expecting to see Dr. Ali Hodge, he sends his regrets as he's not able to join us today. So, unfortunately, you just get to listen to me. Usually, you get maybe Ellie and I a little bit, a 1-2 punch, but just me for today. My apologies. So, looks like we have over 75% participating in the poll. So, I'm gonna end that one, and we will go ahead and get started. So Tim shared an overview of what we're looking to do in this webinar today. I want to hit on this a little bit as we get started. Um, as always, with many of our BMD presentations, we think it's incredibly important to clarify and talk about why are we doing this? Why is this important? And we'll talk about this even more as we get into some of the challenges and how some agencies and their industry partners have successfully implemented BMD or are moving that way. The why is so important. It continues to come up as a challenge, but also the way that we can get beyond those challenges. We want to be able to identify the 6 most frequent management challenges that people have encountered when trying to implement BMD. And one thing we'll do throughout this entire presentation is not only talk about the challenge, but what are some of the proven ways to address that challenge? So you may have heard this list of challenges before, read it in a previous AIEI tech brief. What we're really focusing on at this point is how can I get past these? How can I get past some of these really big stumbling blocks that people are running into around the country when it comes to implementing balanced mix design? We'll do the same thing for the 6 core technical challenges, which for those of you in the audience that are engineers, we often gravitate towards. How do I handle those? Also, how to build a roadmap, if you will. It's not my favorite word in the world, but it fits here. That what is a BMD roadmap that gives me progress? We're kind of seeing that maybe some are getting, quote, stuck in moving forward on BMD. Well, how do we get unstuck? What are the things and actions and early wins that an agency and their industry partners can do to get positive momentum on BMD implementation? Right. And then talk about planning training or collaboration. How do we get buy-in to make this happen? All right. And avoid everyone in this room from reinventing the wheel. So you can learn from all the other work that others have successfully done around the country. Okay. And finally, what I think we'll do at the end of this is really good for those that, again, that might feel stuck. What are maybe some early deliverables that you can do that acknowledge that BMD is this long-term thing, but gets you those early wins to start making progress? All right. And that's what we hope you come out of this about an hour from now, and we can have time for questions. So on our agenda, I'm going to again quickly describe why BMD. And I really think this is important because we continue to see people having challenges with the why. All right, being able to get what's needed or communicate what is needed. We'll talk about some peer exchanges that the AIEI program did over a number of years, and that's where a lot of this information comes from. And what we'll spend a lot of time on is what are the key challenges that people who have gone down this road encountered, and what are the actionable steps that they took to get past it, to get past getting stuck. All right. And then we'll end with what are some of the resources that are available to you through AEI and others around the country. So, a lot of this webinar is going to be based upon a recent tech brief that was published April of last year that described these peer exchanges and some of what we learned as a program through this. So this QR code leads you to this document. You can just as easily Google it as well, but this is the kind of source material for some of this. So if you're looking for more details, this is a great document to look at. Hopefully you've read it. So why balance mix design? All right. And again, I've talked through, I can't count the amount of times I've talked through this slide or a similar one. We need to continue to say it because those in this room may know these facts, but we need others to know it as well. Pavement materials is the biggest part of construction spending in the federal aid system. It is the single biggest part of it. All right. Recently estimated at more than 60% of all federal aid obligations for highways was for pavement materials. Again, there's a lot of other topics in that area, but where does the money go? To pavement materials. Nearly 30 billion in 2023 when it was last estimated. So we have that. We know that if we can make better use or get better performance out of that amount of funding, it's going to have huge implications, right? We also acknowledge that all our asphalt mixtures are behaving differently and that what we're currently doing is not necessarily optimizing what we're trying to get for performance. So volumetrics, what we largely do today, designing an asphalt mix based upon volumes of binder and stone, etc., is not necessarily getting us the performance we want. It's not adequately handling that. And the big why always is to improve performance, right? This is always a part of our why, as those of you that are in this industry, that performance is a big reason. Some of the states that we've talked to through these peer exchanges, performance is their big reason. If I get one more year of performance, I felt this as an ex-DOT engineer, right? If I get one more year on a treatment, it goes 8 years instead of 7, 12 instead of 11, all right? The amount of benefit that you can get that is huge, and we're going to talk about that. So, little quiz here to me and my colleagues kind of talk about this quite a bit and what we heard at the peer exchanges. And all of these things were some of the motivations that when we went to peer exchanges, a little bit of a preview, that they said, why am I interested in the concept of balance mix design? And these were all answers that were provided. But one of these popped up most consistent. I'd ask you, what do you think? You can yell it out to yourself, please. Don't come off mute. All right. And do this. But which one was it? And there's a lot here. We talk about it a lot. But the one that we consistently heard, right? The one that we consistently heard was that volumetrics don't always get us optimal performance. What we're doing, what we currently rely on, doesn't always get us the best performance that we're looking for. And then we need something to better capture what really happens in the field because that's what hits the road. That's what the public experiences. And that's the primary motivation that people believe we need to get beyond BMD when we did these peer exchanges. And balance mix design, what is different, right? Other than a new name, all right, something different than volumetrics or super pave. What has truly changed, what has changed is that we have mechanical tests that we can do more practically in a budget, etc., for the asphalt mixes, and that relates to our common distresses. And I won't use the word simulate it would be awfully hard to simulate our asphalt pavements and the temperatures and the loading and all that we have. But they give us a better idea of how our asphalt mixture might respond to a load, to a strain in this particular situation, and relate that to rutting, cracking, moisture damage, etc. So, why implement balanced mix design? All right. Anything that gets us better performance, right? That's the goal of us, everyone in this room, right? We want better performing pavements. But we have to acknowledge that what we do currently may not be optimizing everything, but there are benefits beyond that. All right. There's potential to provide many benefits to everyone in the asphalt community, including better when we get better longevity for our pavements, certainly. It's better when we have a stronger tie between our specifications and true performance, or design and true performance. We don't want those to be different languages. We know that they're different worlds, but we want them to be closer together. We know that there's a lot of pressure and a lot of good reason for it in cases to use more alternative and recycled materials in asphalt mixtures. Everything from wrap, which has been around, to asphalt shingles, to plastics, to fibers, to additives, right? And to allow mix designers in industry to meet a performance need, to have some greater flexibility, if you will, to meet the performance need. And largely what I like to say is our current system is not really set up to handle these innovative items. My personal opinion is that to get performance, BMD isn't necessary for today. I believe BMD or something like it, whatever you want to call it, is going to be necessary for the future when maybe binders change even beyond where they've changed today, where aggregate supply is more challenging and it's going to take some time to get there. That's my own personal opinion, all right? But many will acknowledge that our current system isn't set up to handle these new materials today. And so I have a couple plots I often like to walk through and credit to a colleague in AIEI at NCAT, Tom Harmon, who put an updated version of some of this information. And we just like to lay out that, you know, how much our world has changed since Superpave and volumetrics was developed. All right. And one, this is our funding source, right? Gasoline taxes, state and federal gasoline taxes. And this shows the combined, all right, an average over time, all right, average state and federal fuel tax has gone up from 12 cents to over, 51 cents over time. But if you adjust that for inflation, it's relatively stagnant, right? So I think most that here in agency, you don't feel like you have more money to play with to address transportation infrastructure needs than you did 30 years ago. All right. And then what has changed in the market, if you will? And again, Tom put this together based upon an infographic that was put together by Isaac Howard at Mississippi State. That here we're showing the average liquid binder cost per ton. All right. So the cost of liquid binder since 1980 to 2024. All right. And so obviously our binder has changed, but taking the prevailing binder of the day and what's the cost? And it was roughly $130 to $200 a liquid ton back in the 80s. Okay. Again, I like to out myself. I was born here in 86. All right. So I don't know about these years. Obviously wasn't alive, but obviously we have the data from it and stayed relatively constant for that cost, but then started spiking, right? Oh 04, oh 05, oh 06, all the things that were going on in the market, and we're paying a lot more for binder. All right. So by some measures, if you look at this data, it's over 200% increase in the cost of liquid asphalt binder. Now, if you adjust it for inflation, it's still over a 60% increase. So even it's not just regular inflation that's kind of accounting for that. We're talking about added pressures and things in the market. All right. So we certainly have flat funding. We're getting less with our money with asphalt, all right, because of the cost of asphalt is going up. And this was the Marshall era back here, where maybe we used some wrap, right? All right. But as time has gone on, we've tried to use more and more recycled materials, all right? Volume going up of it, right? Sharp was in this time frame, right? Late 80s, early 90s, right? We had a rubber mandate at the time. That came and went. All right. The superpave era began here with implementation of what was done in Sharp, all right, with increasing RAP. Right. Then we got into once the liquid costs came up, asphalt shingles became very popular, right? More recycling, less virgin asphalt, bring costs down. All right. Warm mix came in, all right around 2010 or so. We had recycled engine oil bottoms. Now we had plastics and recycling agents and whatever is going to come. So, my point and my question always is how comfortable are you with a system that was built on this reality of the world, right? In here somewhere, when this is our reality today? With funding and different market, etc. They are different worlds, right? And having something like BMD to build for the future is a big part of the why. There's also many success stories out there, and I'm not going to belabor this point because webinar number 3 in April, which I hope you have already registered for, but if not, the QR code is there. We're going to have an entire webinar about those that are seeing measurable benefits with BMD. For many years, we've had the we think it's working. We think it's working. Well, now we have agencies and states and research that is showing the measurable benefits that people are seeing by implementing BMD successfully. So we've got examples where Illinois, again, one of the leaders here, has eliminated premature failures due to cracking and tenderness. Louisiana is seeing longer service lives in what they're measuring for their BMD mixes. Texas has an example I'll show later. All right, New Jersey is where this plot comes from, which we love to show that they've been able to improve their entire network because of some of their mixes lasting longer. And a key point I always like to make is it didn't look like much in the beginning. Didn't look like this big improvement, but it has accumulated over time where they have made an important improvement on their network by taking 20% of their program and making it more reliant on BMD principles. So again, please tune into webinar number 3 and we'll really dive deep on these success stories. So what are we primarily going to talk about today is the peer exchanges. All right. We've done these peer exchanges over the course of a couple years, and I was lucky enough to be involved with these primarily from the federal highway side when I was there. But the AIEI program conducted these regional peer exchanges as well as some others, mega states, etc., through the program as a way to get agencies to talk to one another. It's one of the great things that we're able to do through the AIEI program is getting states to share information with each other on how do they do things, how do they see things successfully. And our objective at the time, all right, was to identify implementation challenges, what stands in the way of implementation, all right, what stands in the way of that, how have they made effective practices to get past that, and what lessons did they learn? So, credit to Tom Harmon, who generated the scary AI image of the team that did a lot of these. You see the redhead right there. That's me, Ellie, Tim, Randy West, Fan Yen, and Tom Harmon. They were part of delivering these across the country, and they were done for about 2 years. All right, a span of 2 years, starting in the Southeast, then going to different parts of the country. We've been doing peer exchanges with the mega states, what we call California, Texas, and Florida, as a way to keep them connected, but they have kind of a lot in common with the size of their program and some of the challenges that they have. No, we did not leave some of these states out on purpose, all right? Some just couldn't make some of them, etc. But we had many agencies that were able to talk and share this information with each other. All of these have reports that are available that kind of summarize what was discussed, but I'll be synthesizing what did we learn from all of these, all right? Peer exchanges again have just some sampling of some pictures. One that was held in Illinois, all right, with Midwest folks, all right, Indiana, etc., and one that was Mid-Atlantic in DC just last year, all right, with a lot of the people that were there. Again, one of the great things that we're able to do is to get state DOTs, agency people, people in this industry to talk to one another, see and learn from each other. So, what did we learn? All right. So, what I'm going to spend most of the time that we have here is talking about the key challenges. Right? And this is detailed in that tech brief. I have spoken about this before, even on an AIEI webinar. But I don't want to just dwell on the challenge or the problem, if you will. Challenge is often a word that we use when we really mean issue, problem, obstacle, right? Challenge is supposed to mean that I can get past it, right? And that's where we want to spend our time today, is primarily talking about how did people get past it? What strategies did they use to meet this obstacle and get past it? So, credit to Ellie Harsh, who's not here today, who was able to kind of look at these challenges that we had after listening to all these agencies talk about this. Well, how do we categorize this? And we're able to categorize it into three different bins, if you will. Management challenges, not technical, not about the test, not about the numbers, not about the procedure, but more about how does an agency, a state with their industry, administer change. Then we have technical challenges. I think for those of you in the audience that are engineers, have an advanced degree, something along those lines, we think about these first. All right, so I think you'll find some then. And then we have some that are overlapping. Couldn't kind of put into one bin or another, so we put it into an overlap. And this is the progress that I'll show over the next slides. So this is a table that is right out of that tech brief that I mentioned earlier, all right, and shows what were the primary challenges that were discussed at each one of our peer exchanges that we had. Southeast, North Central, Northeast, Rocky Mountain, Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, right, from the regional standpoint. And you'll see that not all challenges were reported for every single region. What I do find funny, again, because our primary audience that was part of these peer exchanges were engineers, is that every single technical challenge was identified for every single group. But yet, when we got to management or some of the overlapping, they started to deviate a little bit. So it wasn't like 100% around the board, across the board for every agency, but this was the general feeling from the peer exchanges. So let's take these one by one, all the management, technical, and overlapping challenges, give you an idea of what does that challenge really mean, but really how to get over it. And we'll start with management, because I believe after doing this and hearing about some of how people are trying to implement BMD across the country, I think we undersell how important the management challenges are, and that how important it is to spend time talking about how to do these and not always on the technical side. So, change management is what we call our first management challenge. And the way I'd kind of talk about this is we have some level of resistance to change, right? Not only as those of you that are engineers, but public agencies might be risk averse, etc. We have all these kind of thoughts or stereotypes, but it is true that we have some resistance to doing something new in our industry. And what we find is that often, all right, as a challenge, there's a resistance, but often we find it's due to unclear goals or unclear priorities. Well, are we just doing BMD because it's something new? All right, I like to joke. I tell the same joke, so I feel bad for Tim and others that have heard me talk before, because you hear the same ones over and over. But you don't just do BMD because the cool kids are doing it and all the other states are doing it. Have a reason to do it. And that often, if you're having a lot of resistance, well, maybe my goals and priorities aren't clear. So how have agencies been able to get past that? They identify a champion. All right. Internal champions as an agency, and then find champions in industry to talk, and they're clear on BMD goals and scope. What am I trying to achieve by doing this? Because as we'll talk about, it's going to take resources. So I got to have a reason. All right. And even go as far as to document it, so that when asked, someone who's involved with it could tell you, what are we trying to get out of BMD? Through this process, emphasizing performance is obviously a big win, right? Again, that concept of getting another year is big within our industry. Show how that is an improvement. Again, I'll talk about that in a minute. And when possible, align it with state internal priorities. We had some agencies that had their state priorities were to maybe, include recycling, do a lot of recycling. Well, They were able to maybe tie my BMD priorities with that. In conjunction with our state priorities, we are trying to recycle more by implementing BMD. All right, make those ties when able. And my point always on this one is that, again, had a wonderful training class early on in my career where it described change as painful. All right, when you're asking somebody to change something, you're asking for them to knowingly go through, quote, pain. And the level of that pain may be different depending on the change. But that's why needing to know why is important. We don't just change for the sake of it. Because heard this Derek Neener plant guy talk about BMD, and so now I want to change everything that I do. All right, it's got to have a why behind it to make up for that pain, if you will. Moving on to our second management challenge. Building upon what I just talked about, it has to take effort to build the business case and do it early. And our challenge at the time was that there was limited business case for BMD investments because balanced mix design implementation will take resources. It's one of the challenges later on. Okay, will take resources, and there was limited studies on the payoff of those investments, right? Because we always need to balance our need for quality or something like that along with investment. So what we found that works here again for action is when possible, develop a business case, even estimate cost and benefits, right? Maybe find document case studies, right? And again, we're going to have some of these for you in webinar number 3. So I really, if you're struggling with this, I recommend you attend that webinar. Maybe even do life cycle cost analysis comparisons. My kind of idea here is maybe you don't know the performance extension that BMD is going to get you today, but how much resources would you be willing to pay for that one extra year? Maybe do some life cycle cost analysis that says how much extra money would be worth it in order to get one extra year on my mill and fill treatments, right? And knowing that if it's less than that, and I am confident I get it 1 year, then it's worth it, etc. And all of these are in the vein of addressing executive level or industry contractor concerns. Everyone's got to know the why. Why are we doing this? Otherwise, you're going to reach roadblocks when you ask for resources. And so we do have an example to highlight here, all right, in this vein, and it comes from Texas, right, where Texas is ongoing looking at BMD implementation, all right, on a wide scale on their network. I just talked to Texas about some things, an update on what they're doing last week. But here's an example where they were able to get some testing done on the National Center for Asphalt Technology NCAT test track, where they compared 2 of their mixes, right? One that is BMD, all right, circles, and one that's a standard mix per their spec. And what they saw over the NCAT test track 2 cycles is that they saw at least a 5 million easel life extension. At least it's still going at this point. So measure it how you want, 30% life extension, whatever the case may be, or 5 million easels, etc. Different ways to measure it. But this wasn't necessarily on their roads. They didn't have the time to do that. They did accelerated loading, but this helps give them confidence that I'm going to see the payoff for this. I'm going to see that performance payoff. If there's anything you can do along these lines, this is another example of how to show it's worth it and make that change easier. M3 is about spec and risk management, and this is all a challenge where there's a lot of uncertainty about how BMD is going to work in the future, primarily in the field, in a quality assurance environment under production. So that would be acceptance, quality control. How do BMD mixes fit into that? And there's not a lot of answers at this point. And that uncertainty about exactly what it's going to look like gives people kind of a little that discomfort, and they hesitate. So there are things to do here, and I would say the nationwide landscape is focusing more and more on what does BMD mean in production, in acceptance. What does that look like? There are ongoing studies being done at Capri and other efforts going on. So I think the national level is going to see what's going on, and that's what we talk about, collaborate nationally, reduce risk, kind of standardized specifications, and there's a lot of effort going on there. But understand with some of these other actions that they can have some, quote, performance specifications that align with BMD that don't have to jump to accepting on BMD. And we'll show examples later on, again, that people can move down this way without having to eat the elephant whole, if you will, where you can do BMD in production, all right, and maybe still do it so that I can minimize impacts to timelines, etc. There are ways to do that. And we don't need to know exactly what BMD implemented into an acceptance program looks like, but we shouldn't let that stop us from making some progress today. M4 is about resource allocation, obviously a big one. I need resources in order to do this, right? BMD is going to need people, equipment, and time. Anyone that tells you it's going to be less work, I haven't seen evidence about that, at least while I'm trying to implement, right? And we all live in a case, whether you're in DOT, industry, etc., where you have limited funding, personnel, equipment for implementation. Right? I was in an agency, right? There wasn't two of me or three of me just asking for stuff to do. We were all busy. Same thing at contractors, etc. Now, what can you do? You can phase investments, all right? You don't have to commit to a full thing, get kind of one step at a time. Seek partnerships with academic institutions, especially for agencies. Trying, bring that all along, not doing it all at once. All right. Try and get some external funding if possible, through, pooled funds or other ways, and try and address this. But I think the big message and an example I like to give is Virginia, where Virginia, when we first talked to them 5 years ago, had just been starting BMD. And now they're really one of the leaders nationwide. But still, the state of Virginia initially targeted a subset of their asphalt mixtures. They kind of knew that I couldn't do BMD for all my mixes all at once. It was too big of an ask. So they targeted a certain subset, and that subset was non-polymer modified surface mixes. That's where they felt they got their biggest bang for the buck. And the image that I tried to throw in there is leveling up, right? Get to level one. They've gotten to that point with a certain subset of their work. All right, maybe it's that, maybe it's high priority work for you, but you don't need to implement BMD on every ton of mixture in your state in order to make progress. And often it will hurt you if you try and do too much at once. And this is one way to calibrate, if you will, your resources, what you have for available resources, and plan your implementation accordingly. And that gets to implementation planning, all right? That we don't just do BMD willy-nilly and just, well, we're going to see what happens. You need a plan. It's a big enough effort where if there is no formalized plan, then time can get away from you. Unfortunately, I have talked to some that kind of 1 year and they said, yeah, we're looking at BMD, we're doing some testing. A year later, same place. Yeah, we're looking at BMD, doing some testing. Year later, well, I'm looking at BMD, we've done a little bit more testing. A couple years has gone by and not necessarily any closer to implementation. So it's a big enough effort that needs a formalized plan. So action that we've seen, develop some sort of implementation, all right, plan with clear tasks, milestones. Because it's a long-term effort, you can't just have one thing that says, yeah, we'll be done in 4 years. What's a milestone that's closer that I can work on first? Again, let me get to level one before I get to level two. All right. Try and get some responsible parties. All right. And use planning tools to actually manage how complex this might be. And again, I have an example here that I'll give. And this example is from a lead state of Illinois. And we've shown this plot, this figure before. But this is an initial schedule of some of their efforts to develop the Illinois Flexibility Index test. They already had the Hamburg wheel tracker implemented. They wanted a cracking test. The iFit is what they came up with. And this shows 2012 to 2016. It shows pretty simple, right? Research. We'll start doing, finish the research, then we'll do pilot projects, and then we'll get all the machines online, right? This is what it seems like at first. Well, what actually happened is this. Right? Number one, a lot more detail, all right? A lot of different things that were done. The plan can change. And I think sometimes as engineers, almost like the acceptance topic, well, I don't know exactly what's going to look like. So I can't make a plan until I know that. I can't start on BMD implementation because I don't know exactly what I want yet. That can come over time, but make a plan and then you're going to start to deviate. All right. But have those milestones that, okay, at the end of this year, I want to have a specimen fabrication procedure, make progress the next year, etc. And then you can get there as you see the example from Illinois, right? M6, our last management challenge, is all about getting stakeholder engagement. And I like this statement up top. Getting industry buy-in is not optional, right? You need to get buy-in across your stakeholders, all right? And this is primarily directed at our agencies that are listening in today, right? You need to get buy-in from your stakeholders. It's going to be more challenging if not, and there'll be additional roadblocks. So how have people gotten over this, right? Number one, they've resisted the urge to not bring industry and keep industry informed. Well, we don't know what's going to look like yet. We're going to wait till we figure some stuff out. Well, if you've already figured everything out, how does bringing them in at the end feel? Is their input appreciated if they're brought in at the end, right? So what we've seen is successful is establishing some form of agency industry task force. Also an idea where if it's important enough, it should probably have its own task force. If it's just rolled into business as usual, how important is it? Have some sort of forum, feedback loop, workshops, whatever that brings in these stakeholders, makes them feel, again, and gather their input so that it is important. And then understand your stakeholders, large contractors, small contractors. They might be different in how they look at this. What are the benefits that they are looking at? This is, again, I go back to the why. Why are they interested in doing this, right? They should have some whys of their own. And so another example that I like to highlight, at least, Virginia is a pretty big state with a big program. They ended up using a combination of two committees to work with industry, where they have an overall BMD task force and then they have a technical subcommittee, understanding that maybe the intricacies of the specimen fabrication procedure go to the technical subcommittee. But the overall timeline and the goals of this effort, maybe that stays with the parent BMD task force. Right now, they're a big enough state and a big enough program to differentiate between these two. Maybe that doesn't work for you, but again, worked throughout with industry. They've been having this for years. It's separate than what they normally do. All right, so it's important. And one key thing is, even in this case, they had implementation timelines that were delayed when necessary, when industry needed more time. When they felt they weren't ready to take this step, we need 6 more months. I need 9 more months before we can initiate this spec to get ready. And that's a good practice. You want everyone to be on board. All right, transitioning to my technical challenges, right? Which I think probably come a little bit easier. Number one, the bullet is validation, right? Validation comes to the word that I use when talking about validation, confidence. It's all about having confidence that whatever BMD stated is, I can test this specimen. It's blurry. All right. I can test this specimen. It's going to tell me something meaningful about this mixture. I don't like the word predict. I don't think it's going to predict, but it's related to performance. Right. So our challenge is that unlike SuperPave, there's not going to be criteria that's nationwide. There is no standard framework or way to do validation. And really, agencies and regions are somewhat on their own, all right, to handle this topic. That, again, I describe it as a good thing about BMD, that Arizona and where I live in Maine are going to have different criteria. But the challenge is then I can't copy from another state as easily, right? Okay. So there's actually been a lot of work in the validation space for the last year and a half because of the big challenges that were part of it and how important it is. So try to come up with some sort of plan for validation and do it early. All right. Maybe that's working with neighbors. Maybe that's working with academic institutions, whatever it is. Get comfortable monitoring in-service performance so that I can find some way to relate my lab test to actual performance data. right? Maybe even go as far as collecting and storing field samples for future testing, even if I don't know everything today. Time is your enemy. I like to say that for validation, the best day to start is today, all right? Today or yesterday. Tomorrow it gets a little worse. The day after it gets a little worse. Time is your enemy. You want to see performance differences, and that takes time. So have this is definitely an early one to think about how am I going to handle validation. We do have a couple examples certainly to show about and very different. One that I would say validation is done and but still ongoing, and one that is just in process. So, example again from the lead state of Illinois, where their validation was based upon multiple sources. A real good practice of not putting all your eggs in one basket to figure out what my criteria is going to be. So, they relied on data from accelerated loading. Then they did experimental and pilot projects around the state. They did forensic investigations with coring, right? Then they did ongoing monitoring of new projects where I have data and I'm going to monitor. All of these have drawbacks, right? If we want to get into a technical discussion, they all have drawbacks, but having all of them together gave them a very large amount of confidence that what they selected as a criteria truly did differentiate in performance and believe that they can back that up. Right? That's what you're looking for with validation. Very differently, all right, I have the case example of Wisconsin, or Midwest heavy, right, where their validation is based upon an open road project that wasn't just constructed now. I think it's about 2 years old at this point. But what they did is they took one project and built multiple sections of different BMD performance, tried to design it that way. So this is ongoing, all right, but this is another way to get at it. The point is, you're not going to get any closer on validation by saying, we'll figure that out next year. All right, having some sort of thing, and if you can have multiple sources, multiple ways to get at it, all right, to finally say, what is the relationship between this test and my real field performance? Because that's what matters. Number two is procedures and protocols, where what we're finding with BMD, again, in the technical end, is that specimen fabrication, handling, aging, all of that, these are all things that haven't mattered all that much in volumetrics. They don't make a lot of difference with the tests that we do now, and they're going to with BMD, and they've been shown to matter with BMD. So our challenge is that inconsistent sampling, handling, aging, conditioning, etc., right, can cause variability, which is a technical challenge. All right, that erodes confidence in the test. So we want to be consistent. So what can I do? It is never too early to develop protocols for how I handle materials in the lab and test them. And the big thing is standardize it to improve repeatability. It's less about having the right way to do it, and whatever you're going to do it consistently, right? That's where I think people make a mistake. Because if I'm doing specimen fabrication today than I am tomorrow, are those two results comparable? In a lot of ways, no. So I'm seeing this difference, but is it really there? I don't know. Right? Whereas if I do it a certain way and continue to do it a certain way, it gets rid of that lack of confidence. So documenting these things, it's never too early to come up with my standard procedure on how I'm going to do this. And there's a lot of examples out there for how people do it. Then variability and sensitivity, right? As engineers in this space, for those of you in the audience, there's a lot of concern about the repeatability of BMD tests, where they just have a higher amount of inherent variability than we're used to, right? And that when we see data where there's a lot of variability across labs and mix types, is it sensitive to binder source gradation, production controls, right? In some ways, we want it to be sensitive, in other ways, we don't, and we get concerned. Right? I think it's good that these tests are sensitive to these items because that's what makes a difference in the field. But again, consistency is the big word to think about here for action, right? Number one, try and do interlaboratory studies when able to. Once you get enough people running the test in a given area, interlaboratory studies will find the ways that you're doing it differently. Quantify the variability between lab and plant produced mixtures and how you do it. How much variability is a fair amount of variability based upon these studies? Look at the factors that influence those results and make sure that contractors, stakeholders are aware of those items, and then training, 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 training. And going back to the previous technical challenge, what are my specimen fabrication procedures? Maybe they get altered as I examine variability. So I do have an example here that I'm involved with, and that's a case example for the Northeast Balanced Mix Design Working Group, which is a group of 9+ states that are working together, and they're working trying to in coordination with balanced mix design in the Northeast New England and Mid-Atlantic region. And part of that, they are conducting an interlaboratory study every year. And that's what this plot to the right is from a CT index that they did, 2 mixes, different phases, different specimen fabrication, etc. And what this has resulted in is refinements to specimen fabrication over time. And being part of this, the between labs coefficient of variation dropped from 21% to 14% in 1 year by doing this effort, by greater awareness, by people questioning, oh, well, how do you do that? Oh, I didn't realize that. Things like that. They've seen an improvement. All right. So it can be done. It's one way to try to get at variability and understand it better so it doesn't erode our confidence. T4 is data management, and this is where BMD is going to generate a lot of data, but you want it to be an asset, right? Not a headache. So the challenge that we heard from many agencies is that their data that they need to do BMD, to examine BMD, to do validation, which I would kind of put in this figure here, includes mixed design data, pavement design data, pavement condition data, and acceptance data, that they don't talk to each other. They're fragmented. They're not linked. It's hard to get to. It's hard for the materials people to get pavement condition data. All right. If your BMD data is sitting on someone's Excel drive, an Excel file on their drive, that's probably not the best place for it. So the action that we found as agencies to do this is it's not too early to try and create a centralized and structured database template, right? And something that eventually can link mixed design results with field performance. Maybe that means getting GPS coordinates on where samples are taken out on the road so that I can link it to pavement performance data later, right? Really, I prefer to think about this as start with the end in mind. Think about the people that are going to hopefully in 5 years have all this BMD data and they're going to want to examine it versus acceptance versus pavement condition versus pavement design. Think about them. Start thinking about that now. Because as you collect data, it takes a heck of a lot more work to go back and forensically figure it out, if you even can, than starting by collecting it that way. Think about the person that's going to come into your job after you almost. So another challenge was, again, similar to in the management area, was the pathway to acceptance. Where again, from a technical standpoint, we've got balance, mix, design. And yet that doesn't just incorporate mixed design. It goes beyond mixed design, all right? Because we can't name things well. But we envision this future where we are going to want to use BMD tests for acceptance or to pay the contractor and to use it for that purpose, all right? But we can't necessarily see it. So what can I do? All right. There are things that I can do. First, worry about putting it into mixed design first. Okay. And then there are intermediate steps. It doesn't have to go from BMD for mixed design and then BMD, I'm going to pay on it and I'm going to throw everything else. There are intermediate steps in between there, and there's plenty. They include using mixed design verification protocols early in production. You can read that as a test strip, a trial batch. Early on in the project, let's check that it still meets BMD. That's blending. It's still in production. It's a production mix, but I'm not trying to do it throughout acceptance. I could also do go, no go criteria where I'm not going to pay on it, but I'm going to check in once every couple days on the BMD result. And it's a go, no go kind of thing, right? Then if I do want to go beyond that, I got to acknowledge what I have. I got to acknowledge that based upon the risk, I can do lot, sublot sizes, sample frequency, the way I pay, etc. All of these things need to be thought of in context of how BMD tests work. What are their turnaround? How much can I do? What is the variability? I gotta kind of start from scratch with that. You don't necessarily have to take your BMD test and throw it into your spec where asphalt content is today for acceptance. And so with this challenge, we do have a couple places where people are making progress. And again, I'll go to Virginia for a case example and then another. In Virginia, they're currently conducting informational BMD testing for production control. So there's no pay adjustment. Okay. This helps them because they're not sure that they can keep up, number one, with that testing frequency, but they're doing something. It gives them data to make a decision later. So they're still having a presence in production, but it doesn't have to be for pay. All right. At least not to start and then decide if that's a place you want to go in the future. On the other end, you've got New Jersey, where it's been doing certain mixes with mechanical testing for years and years before we even called it BMD. They do pay adjustments based upon BMD results for specialty mixtures, but only after years of experience of some informational testing that they did first. They did not jump to that right away. All right, and then the final technical challenge here is what do I do with volumetrics? All right, you're telling me BMD is different than volumetric. Well, what do I do with them? Do I just throw it out? And again, there's that word uncertainty. What do I do? Do I retain? Do I relax? What do I keep? What do I not keep when it comes to volumetrics? All right, and so what have people done? You can kind of look at and see from a risk standpoint what volumetric or aggregate properties, constituent properties could be relaxed or eliminated and get there over time. To me, I think there's a lot being done nationally that kind of points at maybe measures like air voids aren't as important as we thought they were. Maybe that's a place to start. But really, this also, I think, gets back to validation. All right, having some sections that don't meet volumetrics that perform well. That will give you confidence. All right, so again, as an example of someone, Louisiana is one of our lead states across the country that they do a lot of BMD at mixed design. But during this process, they have allowed a range of target air voids for mixed design within the BMD specification. So you don't have to target 4% air voids. They have a range. Mixed designer has a choice, right? And that's a relaxation from SuperPay. That's probably a tier one relaxation. If I talk about the new AASHTO spec that will be coming out, it's the first step, if you will. All right. But it is something that then the data can show me what do I relax in the future. Again, I would make the point that I don't need to know exactly what I'm going to relax 4 years from now. Let's start the process now and get some progress. All right. What's overlapping? All right. What are my overlapping topics? All right. I actually made this image, all right, and what I based upon is the Spider-Man meme of them all pointing at each other, and I meant for this to be engineers all pointing at each other. And so what this challenge was that we heard from agencies often that the different offices, BMD encompasses a lot, all right, materials, construction, pavement management for how things are performing, that BMD may not be integrated into every part of their agency depending on how they're set up, and that they may have disconnect between these groups within an agency. And so that's certainly going to be a challenge. All right. So what have they done to try those that are doing this is certainly to partner almost like with industry, partner with the different parts of their DOT early on in the process. Don't figure it all out and then go to pavement management. Here's what I need from you. All right. Try and get a champion in each one of these areas. All right. And how will these decisions be held? And look at again the why. The why is this important for every one of these entities? Education and training, just like any new item, would be important where you needed people to be competent. You need good people who are going to be able to do the job, and that's going to be necessary. So at the time, there was very limited formal training on BMD test methods and how to interpret it. And then that's a significant skill gap for our industry. Now, since we've been doing this, I think this gets closed and there's more and more BMD training every day. But find ways, people that have taken action here, they've collaborated with universities, industry, try to put on hands-on modules for the test themselves. There are even those states that are doing certification programs and really plan for continuous training. That I think our industry kind of maybe got into the idea of, I trained him 5 years ago. How does he still need it? Or I just trained him, he left for another job. Right? We're going to have continuous turnover now. We need to plan that we can't just train once and walk away. All All right. And there's a lot of programs like AIEI that are available to help up people's knowledge on these topics. Right. And then our final, all right, challenge, our third overlapping challenge is collaboration, information sharing, or otherwise, as I summarize it here, please don't reinvent the wheel. All right. BMD is not something you can necessarily copy from another state, another agency, another contractor. However, we also don't need to go it alone and not learn anything from others. Right. So the challenge is we have many agencies working in isolation, and there's very little knowledge sharing between them. Travel bans, it's hard for agencies to share this information. So what we found to work is having regional working groups. Again, the Northeast is a good example of that, where they are talking every month about BMD for an hour, right? Keeping up on what each other's are using, where they can share specs, lessons learned. Also, industry feedback, or getting industry feedback on a more regional level or a national level to help bridge that gap between research and practice. And another great example of this is the work that the Balanced Mix Design Implementation Working Group is doing to really get at this challenge. All right, let's share effective information for what people are doing across the country, all right, and give resources. This is collaboration between agencies nationwide, but also contractors, other stakeholders. If you don't know about the BMD IWG, I encourage you to kind of become a friend of the group, as this group is doing a lot in this particular area. So those are all my challenges. And again, after presenting this, sometimes I feel like, well, this is a bunch of bad news. These are a bunch of the problems that I have. And well, what about the solutions? All right. So I'm going to try and key on what we heard from agencies and what we've seen as some opportunities, some good actionable steps, and some early wins that you can have if you're stuck. Right? If you're here sitting today, we haven't moved much on BMD, check yourself against these items and have I done these? All right. So, some key takeaways first. First ones I have here, starting with a plan, having some sort of plan. We have unfortunately seen it too many times where people don't make a lot of progress. There is no plan. Okay? And keyed in with that is why. Why are we doing something new? Why are we considering doing something new? What is the payoff for me and others? Again, please tune in to the rest of our webinars. We're really going to hit the why and the benefits that people have seen. Champions from years of experience, decades of experience through our entire team. When we see agencies and states move forward and implement something, it always comes with a champion saying, I'm going to push this forward. That's often necessary for something, for changes that we're talking about. Account for staffing needs, all right? So knowing what your current resources and workload and plan accordingly. And often we say that plan staffing accordingly, like you can just hire 10 more people. Go at it the other way if that's not a possibility, which I assume for many it's not. Scope your BMD implementation to meet what you can do for staffing. Even if it's smaller than you'd like up front, well, then maybe it proves itself. Maybe you see the benefits and that added staffing could happen, right? So calibrate those two together. And then invest in training, all right? Having some consistent staff training on BMD as a concept, the BMD test results, all right, and implementation strategies. Things like this webinar is a good example, all right? And so as part of this, I refer you to our 8 tasks BMD tech brief, excuse me, all the 8 tasks for implementation. This has been out there for a number of years. There's the tech brief, there's the QR code to get to it. That if you want to make a plan, start with this, all right? And I'll actually show on the next slide, Texas, one of our lead states right across the country that is actively looking at BMD, actually did that. When they took the 8 tasks, they took that and made it their own, right? Took each task, said, what are we doing with this? What's our status? When's it going to be complete? It's courtesy of Amy F. Martin at TTI for sharing this and TxDOT for allowing them to share this with us. But this is a great example of this is something. Doesn't have to be a 20-page written plan, but this is something that says this is what we're trying to get at. This is how we're going to make progress. Second page of key of takeaways. Start validation early. Time is the enemy. All right. If you wait another year, that's another year you have to wait to start getting field performance on BMD sections or something along those lines. It's one of the most important things, and unfortunately, many people wait to start thinking about validation. It should be one of the first things you think of. Having a transition mindset is the idea in inspiring confidence. We can think about the many reasons why it will not work. What about the reasons it will work? What are the benefits? Again, that shows what's the why and how is that important. Collaborating with industry, engage with your contractors, consultants to get early buy-in, really, and get that input. You don't want to get 3 years down the road on BMD implementation and completely miss what industry's priorities are, right? Their why, everyone's why should be included in what you're trying to do for BMD, all right? Again, the agency is going to make a final determination, but that input is important. Leverage peer resources when you don't need to reinvent the wheel, you know, don't need to come up with some brand new parameter because the 49 other states haven't figured that out yet. Use others or templates. Understand that I can't just copy it, but try and avoid redundant work when possible. Then utilize existing funding. If there's implementation support, all right, different organizations that are looking at BMD, maybe other states have a same challenge or problem, or states have have a same challenge that you have. Maybe you guys could work together. Maybe you try and create a research needs statement or tell somebody about it in a national program that can get something solved. And so, on the topic of validation, all right, there was a Capri document written a couple years back about a guide for validation that is still out there. This is a newer project that is highlighting the different strategies for validation of balanced mix design. This is through Capri again, but it has more ways to do it. The previous guide was kind of written as you have to do open road sections, all right? Well, the BMD IWG had a lot of focus on this, and it led to this Capri project where they're creating an overview document and 7 or so case studies of agencies and states that have actually done validation. And what did they do? And what are the different ways that they did it? Or more than one way that they did it. So look out for these. I believe these are going to be coming forth in the next couple months. So will be another excellent resource. And then finally, 3 things here is having a strong data system. Just hearing from state DOTs, a lot we heard like, well, I mean, if I leave DOT, all of our BMD data will be gone, right? That's not a strong data system if that's it, right? So incorporating data detail and think about how I want to use it eventually. It's not too early to think about that. It's easier to do it now. Encourage regional collaboration when possible. Understood that states do things differently for good reasons sometimes, right? But if you can collaborate across state lines or agency lines, etc., that's helpful. And then plan for setbacks, all right? That schedule I show from Illinois, I love showing that one. Or talking about Virginia and how they had to delay a year or two. They're making progress. You can't have setbacks if you don't have a schedule. And that's not a good thing, all right, because it's never going to get done. Again, same course I went to, and if anyone from Maine DOT is here, they'll probably heard the same thing. To me, I've always lived by the mantra, scheduled things happen. If it's not important enough to have a schedule, I guess it's not important, right? So having a schedule is good, all right, to have some goals, but know that you're going to have setbacks. But you still have that why, you still have those benefits, and that's what I'm thinking about going over. So at this point, I kind of, when I've presented this in person, it's like, get some overwhelmed faces, right? Whew, it's a lot. Okay. Well, we're talking about a pretty big shift in how we handle asphalt mixtures, which is the single biggest expenditure for federal spending in the highway space, right? So it's a big deal, right? This is important. But here's some sample action items I thought of that if year one, or even if you're in year 3, but you feel like you haven't made progress, have you done all these? And this is where I can start making progress. Number 1, define why am I doing it? Right? Why am I looking at BMD? Include what are my distresses? I'm seeing a lot of cracking, longitudinal cracking, rutting, etc. What are my performance goals? I want to extend life by 20%. What are the outcomes for all? What does industry want to see out of this, etc.? Define that, and I'd even add document the why. It could change, but this is where it is today. Stand up some sort of team that's going to take this on. Who's going to be the champion? What's the task force with industry to look at this? Who in management above me knows about this? Do they know what BMD is, at least at a talking point level, and what it's going to get us as a state or an agency? Plan validation, right? To target your primary distresses, define what I need for data. Remember, time is the enemy, right? One of the first things you should think about is, boy, I'm going to need a way to compare these results, maybe even getting mix before I even can test it, right? But allow that project out there, try test sections, etc. All right, we have an entire webinar on validation. I can't recommend that one enough. It has Ellie and I and Tim on it, so you don't have to suffer through just me. I promise. That one's a good one. If you want to talk validation, let us know. Identify candidate tests and testing conditions, but you don't need to have exactly what test you want to do and aging and all that figured out to make progress. And that, I think, is a mistake that some have felt. Well, I don't know what tests I'm going to do yet. To be honest, we have states that haven't decided on a test yet, and they're still moving forward. They're evaluating multiple tests. Maybe they don't know yet exactly, but you can still make progress. If you are going to start testing, you need repeatable protocols that I can be consistent with. Specimen fabrication, etc. Again, the goal is consistency, right? And then a database. Define the data that I want to capture. Again, begin with the end in mind. Think about, I can get in the DeLorean, I'm going to go forward 7 years, and what data do they want? What did they wish that they could tell themselves? Geez, I really should have collected GPS data on all that. It would be so much easier to tie to our pavement management system. All right, whatever it is. So, some closing remarks. First, what's at stake here? And again, it seems like a lot. We're talking about a big implementation, and it is. It is a pretty big shift in how we handle asphalt mixtures. But performance of asphalt mixtures is paramount. All right, let's imagine a case where nationwide we get a 10% performance bump on all our asphalt mixtures, right? Doesn't sound all that significant. Well, I said more than $30 billion a year, right? What would that 10% greater lifespan mean? I've got more money to fix more roads because my roads are lasting longer. That amount of impact is huge, right? And it would be game changing. And that's what that plot for New Jersey shows, that even though they only treated a portion of their program, it turned their entire network around over time by having that approach. Innovation potential to meet the future need. Think about the future, and that BMD will take some time to implement. I may not absolutely need it today, but do I need it 5 years from now? Can I envision needing something like that 5 years from now? I would say yes. And our peer exchanges. The peer exchanges, I really enjoy doing peer exchanges. I always think we get something good by having people talk to each other that do what we think is similar in different areas across the country. All right. I've always been in the Northeast. I thought I knew what asphalt paving was until I went to the Midwest or went to the western part of the US. Paving is different, but we still learn things from each other, from someone who does a similar job to you in another place. So what it did illustrate for us at AIEI and everyone involved was there is a need for structural, collaborative, and an approach to integrate BMD. That this is not something I'm just going to throw together. That we are talking about a game-changing innovation that's going to require some work. There are some challenges, but luckily, for almost every challenge that we've talked about, there is a road to get past it. There is a way to address it. But you do need a plan, right? And to take some of those early wins that I talked about as a good way to make progress. So with that, I'll just mention there's a lot of available resources as help. This webinar is part of that. There are other entities, but we can speak for AIEI products. There are a lot of tech briefs, tech snapshots, full-length reports, everything you want at our website. Webinars and videos. Tim mentioned our YouTube channel is where all our previous webinars have now been uploaded. So I would really appreciate it so I can tell my kids I'm a YouTube star and they'll think I'm not just this geeky asphalt guy. So appreciate you watching those. But again, they're available there. If you want to go back again, last year we talked about QA and BMD, validation and BMD, making a plan, a lot of these things I referenced today. And the program has workshops, BMD implementation workshops. We're hoping to start up this fall again and start delivering those. So please reach out on any of the innovation areas that AIEI does, best practices that we talk about, as coming to you and talking about is certainly part of the program. And we have two more of these. And I promise, I'm hopeful that you won't have to listen to just me. You'll get a little variety. Okay. But next one, we're going to talk about 6 DOTs. We checked back in with them 5 years later after originally talking to them and see the progress that they made and the lessons that they learned. And then again, I'm very excited for the last one as well. What is the payoff? What is the benefits from BMD, the measurable ones? We've been talking about this for years. Now we've got some of that hard data, and I'll spoiler alert, it's showing benefits, right? That's why we're still talking here today. So with that, I am happy to take any questions. I appreciate everyone's attention. I'll turn it back to you, Tim.
Yeah, very nice job, Derek. Thanks for filling in. As Derek mentioned at the beginning, he's did double duty where he Miss Ellie Hodge, a professor at University of Nevada, Reno today. But thanks, Derek, for carrying the load. We appreciate that. And also, when we started, Derek and I got on the Zoom early and we started chatting away. We used to see each other in person about twice a month through travels and such, and so we just picked up our conversation where we left off. I neglected to formally introduce Derek, so just want to introduce Derek. He's started his own company, DNP Infrastructure. Prior to that, he worked for our Federal Highway Administration in the Resource Center, and he came to FHWA prior to working for the main DOT. So nice job, Derek. And sorry I didn't give you the formal introduction at the beginning. I
No
just
problem.
got caught up. But we did get some questions that came in and a few questions. If anybody has more questions, we'll probably have a little time for that. So type them in. But I'll go back to some slides, Derek. I don't know if you can go back to about slide
Sure.
11. That's where you showed the quiz
Yep.
and a lot of uh, challenging answers there. It was kind of close for each other. But the question that came in was, I'm surprised by the answer,
Yep.
but can you
I'll get there. Go
describe,
ahead.
okay,
Yeah.
I'm surprised by the answer, but can you perhaps describe how some of the other answer, or how some of the other potential answers play a role in why?
Sure. And I think it's a good question. I would again say that a lot of these motivations were provided. So greater flexibility in material selection. Again, our peer exchanges were with owner agencies. I think that one is there, but that's primarily on the contractor side, right? To meet a specification, et cetera. That's a benefit that we often hear from industry when talking about BMD is, hey, can I have a little bit more flexibility to meet the performance need, use different materials, design my mix differently? That's certainly there as well. Responsible use of recycled materials. Again, this was a popular one with many. There were some states that didn't really care about this, others that it was high up on their list. That they're getting pressure or whatever the case may be. The case is we want to use more RAP or RAS. And the way we want to do that eventually is BMD and get out of kind of specifying how to handle that. Innovation, again, I think that I tie that back to industry. When we talked about innovation from the DOTs, often it was, hey, I get approached by a new additive manufacturer every 6 months, and they want me to use this new thing. If BMD could say, okay, I don't have to write a special provision to use product Z, right? And I could just say meet BMD, it would make my life easier. So that one's there too. And then certainly a combination, which I think you could make the argument that the answer maybe should be combination of all of them, but those are kind of talked through a lot of the big motivations that we heard.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think there's a good point made there, and
Yeah.
I would concur that volumetric properties don't always yield optimal performance, and that was the biggest thing we heard from the states. And so how can we improve that? So
Yep.
that's a good quiz for us.
Yep.
Next question that came in relates to slide 28. This happens to be about M4, which I believe was
Yep.
the largest management challenge identified by all of the states or peer exchanges we visited. And the question simply is, uh, any suggestions on how to get money for equipment? So resources are a challenge, but this looks like this person's being challenged with equipment acquisition.
Yeah, I think exploring any avenue that you have. Previously, there were pooled funds or grant opportunities that maybe I could tie to BMD in some way, and that was a way that many people were going. So I think number one, check those out. Number two, I think again, the benefits and the why are so entwined with this one too, because if I can anticipate the level of benefit, maybe someone is more apt. And then again, I think the you don't need to do it all at once, right? I think what a natural progression that we've seen from many agencies is they get one lab outfitted with some of the BMD testing. They start there, right? They may not get it all at once, and they're able to kind of scope their implementation. I think there are still some opportunities to look at, grant programs or something like that. Again, can I tie in my BMD goals with other things like using more RAP or something like that? I think it really ties back to your why in a lot of ways. But yes, that would be some of the advice that I would give.
Okay, yeah, very good. Um, Now the only thing I could add,
Sure.
sometimes states might put a business case together. And
Yes.
like Derek said, if you tie it back to the why and show how much money you can save getting 1 year life, cases can be made to get more equipment. But it is a challenge in every state DOT. Capital equipment purchases are a challenge. So I can
Nope.
certainly sympathize with the question there. Next, I think we'll jump to slide 40. And as I see it, that's T5, path to acceptance. And
Hmm.
I think Derek, you had given some good examples of how to phase into using these mechanical mixture performance tests. But the question is, what role does volumetrics play?
It's an excellent question because I think that the next technical challenge in six covers this as well, right? And what do I do with volumetrics? Not only at mixed design, but in acceptance. And to me, I view this as um, acceptance and production level testing is a very different animal than what I do at mixed design. I don't believe that you just carbon copy what you do from mixed design and bring it into acceptance. They are different environments, right? Acceptance, there's a lot more time crunch. There's risk assessed, right? And all of that, a lot of money at stake. Not that it isn't for mixed design, but to me, I think that volumetrics could still be a very useful tool as a faster test that could get us consistency. And I'm a big proponent of a lot of what we're trying to test in acceptance is consistency. Mix design is more about to me that the mix I have good, and in acceptance, I'm more worried about am I getting the mix that I thought of? I can't do all the testing to say whether it's good as often as I need to. So I still see a role for volumetrics that almost kind of like a two bars that as I do more BMD testing, maybe I could let go of the volumetrics a little bit. But again, I think it's a very useful tool that I would not abandon at all. So,
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. The only thing I could add is Derek happens to be on the Balanced Mixed Design Implementation Working Group, and he's chair of the role of Balanced Mixed Design and Quality Assurance. I happen to be a member of that myself, and I think we're going to be seeing more information. This is going to evolve. We're going to see more information come out, and I wouldn't let this stop you from creating a plan and moving forward. But I think there is some good information out there. It's just going to be a matter of compiling it and sharing it in some more formal ways. So Look
And I
forward
guess,
to.
Tim, just to add on that, especially in the QA space, where I think, again, a lot of the questions still reside, some of these, what I would consider the most unresolved questions from what I talked about, lie in the QA space. I think by the end of this year, you will see a couple. There's a Capri project on talking about how agencies are doing QA. The BMD IWG is looking at guidance and information. I think there's research projects going on that directly speak to how feasible is this in QA. I think by the end of 2026, we're going to have a lot more information than we have today on some of these considerations about BMD and QA, and I think we'll feel a lot more comfortable at that time.
Yes, yes, well said. And then related, I think with all the questions, we had a second related question. This one came in around T6
Yep.
on the volumetric property usage, I think slide 41.
Yep.
And uh, here we're wondering, how can I get confidence to move away from volumetric properties?
And I'm going to use one word. It's a very good question. That confidence is a keyword that I use, and the one I keep going to is validation. This is all about validation. If I were in that case, there's some advice I've given agencies, stuff like that, as far as validation. If your industry is interested in going beyond volumetrics, maybe make some test sites on projects where they can go outside volumetrics, but meet some BMD number. Do they perform? To me, it's got to be proven, right? And I think validation will inform, well, can I get performance even at 40% wrap? Can I get performance at 2% air voids? Can I get performance at a high voids filled with asphalt number? I think it all comes down to validation to give me what am I going to be comfortable with letting go of.
Okay, very good. Um, Next up, I don't have a slide. This kind of came in as we started with the questions that came in during the presentation, but late question that came in is how soon will artificial intelligence analyses of balanced mix design mixtures start to become more common? How might this affect current processes of trial batching, reviewing, testing, staffing, and so
Yeah.
forth?
I think it's an excellent question, and I think if unless my name is Mike Copeland at Idaho DOT, who knows a lot more about AI, and I don't know if Mike is in here today, so I may have got a smile at him if he is, but if not, I think certainly to me at mix design from a contractor standpoint, this could be a very big tool of maybe it gives me a starting point of how I alter because I think mix design is going to the actual mix designer is going to have a lot more freedom to do what they want potentially, right? Different aggregate, different constituents. I could certainly see AI having a role in saying, okay, where should I start? Maybe what are some combinations I could start? I can certainly see it even starting there of, how do I get to a mixed design that's going to meet this performance need? I'm sure it goes beyond that, and we'll see how it all plays out, certainly.
Yeah, I would like to have a crystal ball for that one myself. It's evolved quite a bit in the last 1 or 2 years, quite frankly.
Yep.
Um, yeah, next up, as wrap usage increases through looking only at mixture performance tests, like the ideal CT or the Hamburg wheel track test within the BMD framework, the concerns for decreased binder quality grows because of the wrap.
Yep.
Are there any plans to incorporate specific binder testing into a BMD model, primarily with blended wrap virgin binders?
So I think you've hit on something that I would almost say is in the QA area, right? I would almost consider that this is one. What do we do with binder testing? In some in visions of BMD, and there are some specs like this in New Jersey, they don't spec binder grade. They're silent on it, right? And say use whatever binder grade you need. What I would say is that we get some different perspectives around the country. But I'd say the most common one is that I'm not sure they're convinced that the binder spec is working, right? And how much does it work if I get to 40% wrap? That's only 60% of the binder in the mix. So I think it's almost like there's more confidence that the BMD test might capture more of the binder quality than the binder quality tests do at a certain point. Now, where it impacts QA is that we know that binder changes all the time, right? Even more than we think it does, and that BMD is showing that. So this might become more of a contractor problem, that the contractor making the mix is going to have to manage my my binder grade a little bit. I think this is definitely a sticking issue. I think it's a great point to see Sean, put that in the chat. I think it's a good point that I think again we're kind of nationwide trying to rack our brains around, well, what do I do with binder testing, with acceptance of binder? Because I'm not sure the system we have has gotten what we wanted, right? And so I almost think it's good that it catches these changes in binder that our binder system doesn't seem to catch right now. So I know that's not really an answer, but I think that is probably one of our newer challenges. And now we're getting the higher order challenges as we're thinking about this moving forward.
And I might just
Right,
briefly
Tim,
add,
go
as
ahead,
we've
please.
seen, as you mentioned earlier, paving across the United States is different from Maine
Mm,
to the Midwest. Aggregates across the United States are different. Well, binders are different as well, and each state probably has some familiarity with their binder source. And we have seen some states add that have implemented mechanical mixture performance tests. They've also added an additional binder test as well to help
yes.
pick up on some unique aspects that they're seeing in their region. So we
Yep.
don't have a national solution here, but if there's, concerns within specific areas, it certainly makes sense to look at. Well, with
Absolutely.
that, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we got a lot of great questions. I think we covered them all that came in, and again, we thank you, Derek, for a great presentation. Well done, and remind everybody that we'll look forward to seeing you March 5th for updates on some of the lead states and the progress they've made in the last 5 years of their implementation journey. So with that, there's a link here. We'd ask you to complete the Survey Monkey because we always want to make these webinars better every time. And so we appreciate your feedback. But please complete that and we'll look forward to seeing you next month, if not before. So thanks again, everybody. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.